All right, and welcome back. And again tonight, we've got Greg Rempe in the studio via telephone. And he is the host of the Barbecue Central radio show, as well as the Barbecue Central forum and the Barbecue Central podcast. So, Greg, welcome back to the Mind of Men.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me back.
So tonight, Greg, we want to go ahead and dive into an individual topic. And if you recall, last time we got together, we talked about general barbecue things. What's the difference between barbecue and grilling, and threw out some ideas of grills. What would be a good idea for a first grill, good idea for a first smoker, that kind of stuff. And I thought that what we might want to do is kind of dive a little further into smokers, because I think most people understand grills. Granted, there's a lot of features and things like that, but at the end of the day, for basic cooking, one grill is just as good as the next, and then all the other add-ons you get just give you some additional flexibility. But sure. Smokers, on the other hand, I think are a pretty different beast in and of themselves. And I really went through a lot of work when I went ahead and picked out my smoker. And I'd been using smokers for a couple of years, so I kind of knew some stuff and knew what I wanted and knew what I wanted to avoid. And so what I thought is maybe we could put together in a nice 25-minute segment some really good advice that would normally take somebody a lot of asking questions on barbecue boards and forums and things like that, and give them some good, solid advice about what kinds of smokers are out there, what the various price ranges are, and what the pros and cons of the different models. The way I want to break this out is I broke it out into different types of smokers. And I grouped them, and again, there'll probably be a lot of debate one way or the other, but I called one group the manual smokers, which are ones that are going to require a lot more ongoing care and feeding, versus what I call the automatic smokers, which are the ones that are more of the programmable, set and forget, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a bit. But let's go ahead and dive into the manual smokers, and why don't we talk a little bit about some of the different styles of these essentially stick burners, as they're otherwise known.
Yeah, these are going to be, typically when I think of stick burners, with my experience in the internet world, barbecue competitions, and talking to people in general, offsets or stick burners these are the ones that look like tubes with big main cooking chambers, and then they have that square offset firebox where you're actually building the fire to keep the heat up, and then that's kind of filtered in through the main cooking chamber and then out an exhaust stack on the opposite end of the cooking chamber. So you have the heat and the smoke kind of wafting over the meat that sits in the main chamber area. If you're looking, if that's what you want, I think when you're looking for a smoker, you have to consider what you're willing to invest time-wise in order to cook. If you are somebody that is completely enthralled with the romance of barbecue and you only want to use wood and you want to try and get it what most would consider as quality or, most traditional kind of barbecue, then that's a kind of pitch that you want to look at, something that is all wood-driven. And you also have to make that commitment that once you get the fire up and running, that depending on what you're cooking, allot your time accordingly and be willing to stick a piece of wood in that firebox every hour or hour and a half, depending on what kind of a cooker you have.
Okay, now I've had some experience with these, and the thing that I found, and you correct me if I'm wrong, what I've noticed is that when you go on the cheap on these things, and you can get really cheap, like you can go to the home center and you can find these, I don't even know what the name of the brand is, but you can see these things that are a couple $100. And yep. I picked up one from Barbecues Galore, which is a mail order shop, and I got, again, an offset smoker that I think was maybe $350, $400 total with shipping. And, it works, but keeping the heat at the right levels, and that's the key with smoking, is you need to have a really long period of time where you stay locked into a very narrow temperature range. And I found that was very, very difficult to do with these cheap smokers.
Yeah, I think inherently, kind of like, with anything that is of quality, you're going to get what you pay for. So if you just want the aesthetics of an offset cooker, but you really don't want to be able to have that pinpoint accuracy control and temperature as you were talking about, then you can go to Lowe's and get one of those char grillers or one of those Brinkmann Smoke and Pro type deals. If you really take a look at their workmanship, you can tell they're mass-produced on a line somewhere. The firebox is leaky and drafty. That's going to hurt any type of consistent temperature that you're going to be able to maintain during the course of a cook, because you're going to always have a certain amount of oxygen on the fire that you cannot back off of it. So you're going to be running a little bit hotter. Temperatures are going to be hard to control. And it really kind of turns into more of a chaotic event for the guy that's tending the fire. And ultimately, it's my personal belief that if you kind of cheap out on a bad smoker, that could be the thing that really turns you off to the whole art of barbecue. And I would hate to have that happen to anybody. I would rather just have you figure that you can't make it, good meat, and you have the good equipment there, and it's just the cook's problem, or perhaps you've gotten into something that you really don't like. But I would never want it to be the piece of equipment turning somebody off, and I think a lot of times that happens. The other thing with that is, in order to make that thing cook halfway decent, you have to go in and make a lot of modifications to those particular type of smokers. You have to go in and add one of those. They're kind of like those dryer type flexible arms that you put in the main cooking chamber and get a draft more down towards the actual cooking grate in order to get the draft working properly. A lot of guys don't even bother using wood with that. They just use charcoal and baskets. Why would you want to spend $250 or $300 on this only to invest more money to get it to cook average at best? To me, I'm with you. I would never buy one of those things.
Right. So then what you then look at is you end up looking at the clothes, the pits and spits, and there are other ones out there. And I did a quick search on their website, and the cheapest clothes I came across, and granted I didn't do an exhaustive search, starts you around $1,100, and for a pits and spits you're looking at about $1,600, and that doesn't include shipping.
Right. Yeah, shipping is going to be huge because you're dealing with solid steel pieces of equipment here, and I would imagine being in the freight business now over 3 weeks, if you're going to be shipping that, it's kind of a specialty piece and it's heavy. You could be looking easily in the $600 to $800, maybe $900 just in shipping charges. So that's something you always have to take into account and see if there's some type of deal you can work out with the person you're buying it. But yeah, closes are going to be $1,100 for their their smaller versions. Gator pits are probably going to be somewhere in that similar vicinity. The Spits and Pits, the Austin Nationals. There's a host of offset pit makers that are all high in quality, but there seems to be a huge gap in price between what you can get at the home store and what I would consider if I was going to be getting an offset pit, and probably you would too, Mike, and Jim, is if I'm going to buy it and I'm going to want to get the use and the craftsmanship out of it, is it going to be $1,000 investment base and then any additional customizations you make to it and then the shipping?
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's take a look at another style, what I consider the manual, which is the Kamado-style cookers. And those are, most famous one obviously being the Big Green Egg, and then there's also a Kamado brand name. And those will run you about $400 to $500 starting, and they go up to between $1,000 and $1,800 depending on the size that you get. What are your thoughts on those?
I like these grills, and it's because of their twofold effect or their twofold capability. They're all ceramic made. All these guys that are making these kind of grills and slash smokers are all making them out of this ceramic. Kamado goes way back into the ancient times of cooking with ceramics, and I believe it was brought over by some of the GIs, back in the 70s when they were stationed in the Far East, saw them and really talked well about them. And that's how Ed Fisher from Big Green Egg kind of first heard about him and got him over and started his business. So it's ceramics. They've obviously progressed, and research and development has made them better and better throughout the years. But here's what's unique about these things. It's like 2 in 1. You can use them as a low and slow cooker. They all those brands kind of light quickly inside of 10 minutes. And then once you adjust their damper at the bottom and the chimney on the top, those things lock in, the ceramics heat up, and they can sit there rock solid at your temperature that you picked for hours on end, and they are fuel misers because you're not using anywhere near the amount of energy to keep these things hot because the ceramics warm up, and it's really a beautiful thing. So low and slow is not a problem for those, and a number of guys use them in competition, and they succeed a lot with those, winning not only individual segments but grand championships. On the flip side, if you want to grill something, you open that damper wide open, and it's certainly no secret that Big Green Eggs and all those other ceramics can easily heat up into the 700, 750 degree mark. So grilling or getting a good sear on a steak is no issue. And again, it's all very economical when it comes to fuel. So I don't own one personally, but I would sure get one if someone would want to give it to me. Hint, hint.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have a Big Green Egg. I've got a medium-sized Big Green Egg, and I really like it for exactly the reasons you just gave, because it is a very versatile piece of equipment. The only problem I have with it is it's not as easy as some people make it sound to get that temperature to stay in for a very long cook. And one of the problems I seem to run into with, at least with my egg, and it's because maybe it's a medium, it's not the largest one, is that the fuel starts to run low probably 6 or 8 hours into the cook. And the design of these is such that it's not really easy to add more charcoal to it or more wood to it once you've actually got everything laid in there, because you really can only go in from the top. There's no like side door that you can really open up and add more fuel.
Yeah, I've heard that, trying to refuel at some point is pretty much impossible. I've honestly never heard of anybody saying that they've run into an issue where they were going to be running out of fuel, as you had mentioned, just because it seems the majority of the time that as it gets hot and it is able to retain so much heat that it would burn less fuel. But I'm certainly not discounting the fact that that's happened to you. Obviously, you own one and you're giving real-life experience. So, if that's an adjustment that they could make in order to able to refuel it easier, then I think, that just adds to the cachet of the whole unit. And maybe that's why some people are more interested when they buy these type of ceramic cookers to outfit them immediately with that aftermarket, those pit temperature control devices like the Stoker or my favorite, the Barbecue Guru.
Yeah, I think the other thing, too, is that it's probably also a significant amount of user error on this one. And, I'll be the first to admit it. I haven't spent as much time as, say, the real experts who use this thing. And I guess the only point I'm making on this is that I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, and the people that really know what they're doing say this will do it. I think the point that I kind of want to bring up is that don't buy a Big Green Egg or a Kamado-style cooker for that matter. Bring it home, fire up for your first smoke, and think you're going to nail it out of the park. It's going to take some getting used to. You're going to have to put some time in to really understand how this cooker works.
I think inherently that is true across the board with any type of cooker that you get. You can never just go in, get it home, season it, or do whatever you have to do to it, and then think you're going to be masterful chef ace right off the top. You always have to, as we call it, get to know and love your cooker, so you know exactly how to use it, and that takes some time and a lot of practice.
Yeah, well, my FEC 100 pretty much hit a home run first time I fired it up. So, of course, we'll get to that in a bit. There's a cost associated with that. So let's move to the last one of what I call the manual ones. And I know this is one that you have a little bit more experience with, the water smoker category. And these run from as low as, say, the Pro Q, which is a relatively new one coming out of the UK that's just becoming available here, which is very similar to the Weber Smoky Mountain, which I know you have. And then on up to the Backwoods smokers. And, they run from the $200 range up to about the $1,300 range, depending on which one you want to go with.
Right. I think, again, as we had stated in my last interview, I think pound for pound, the Weber Smoky Mountain is probably where it's at for charcoal-driven bullet-type smokers, water-type smokers, in that price range. The Pro Q, in my opinion, there's still some issues with that. It looks a little bit different, and I think you get more stackable space because of its engineering. But I don't think the amount of grill space that you actually get, or cooking space, is anywhere near what you would get on the WSM. And I don't know if they're actually working on trying to expand that or what have you. But I know a lot of teams that use it, and they're not dissatisfied with it, but they're not overly raving about it either, and I won't mention anybody in particular. Weber Smoky Mountain for me is great. You get a lot of cooking space. Once you learn the cooker and you learn how to fire it up, and I use the Minion method on that, you really kind of watch the temperatures rise up, and once you get within a 20, 30 degree range of where you want to be, you make your damper adjustments, and it kind of just settles in and locks in, and I can go all night without having to make another adjustment. On the off chance that I have to actually refuel at some point during the cook, it does have that access door where you can throw a couple handfuls of charcoal in to keep it going pretty much around the clock as long as you want it to, or until the ash built up too much and choked the fire out. You can also do what's called a hot squat, where you leave the cooker pretty much assembled, and you lift the dome and the main cooking chamber off the charcoal bowl, and set it down, and then, just put as much charcoal you want back in the bowl and then reassemble. That's kind of potentially dangerous, but, you get a little lazy, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you do things that maybe you shouldn't. But that's the hot squat. And then, of course, you have those uprights that you were talking about, like the backwoods or the spice wine cookers or the stumps. And those are really more of the high end. They do very well in competition. I would love to have 1 or 2 of those in my arsenal as well. And it's just, better made, thicker made, insulated. They're very good on fuel as well. And the paint jobs are nice on all of them, and they all come with very good reputations and are really growing in the industry. I would love to have one of each if I could get my hands on them.
Yeah, now, and again, in my ignorance, what I would say is between, say, the Weber Smoky Mountain and the Backwoods, and again, the difference is Weber Smoky Mountain you can get for about $230. The Backwoods is going to start you at about almost $900, and you're going to get a lot more cooking space with the Backwoods, and also, as you alluded to, they're well insulated. And my big concern with the Weber Smoky Mountain is that one's going to be a lot more sensitive to the atmospheric temperature versus some of the bigger, heavier ones that have more insulation. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, you're just dealing with kind of a thinner-walled Weber Smoky Mountain. So when I'm cooking in the middle of the winter, if I'm doing an overnight cook, there's no doubt that at some point on a pork butt cook, I'm going to have to go in and throw 4 or 5 handfuls of charcoal just to keep it going because, again, it's releasing more energy due to the thin walls, and it's inherently just going to burn through more fuel. Now, in the summertime, I never have an issue with having to refuel because it's just warmer out and it doesn't consume as much energy to keep the temperature up. With the backwoods, with the spice wines, with the stumps, they're insulated up to 12 or 1600 degrees, and it's pretty much whether it's 10 below outside or 100 degrees outside, the temperature doesn't vary at all inside of those, and your fuel consumption remains very consistent and really allows you to cook in any type of weather condition. And I think that's one of the best bonuses and pluses of those. Plus, again, you're looking at 2 cooking grates on the Weber Smoky Mountain versus 4, 6, or 8, depending on what kind of an upright you would get from the higher end models.
Okay.
So you get a lot more cooking space with those.
Now, you mentioned the minion method of starting. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, there's a guy out in Seattle, Washington, who's a very well-known barbecue competition cook. He's won a number of awards. His name is Jim Minion, and I was actually going to try and have him on my radio show next week to actually go over the whole history of the Minion method. But basically, Jim was at a competition and just kind of broke out a brand new Weber Smoky Mountain through the direction book out like you're supposed to with those things, and then proceeded to fill the charcoal bowl up with pretty much unlit charcoal, and then lit 15 or 12 pieces of charcoal and kind of just sprinkled them over the top of the unlit. Assembled everything, and the best way for me to describe it would be like, how chain smokers light one cigarette off of another. This is similar. As the charcoal that is lit is burning down, it's constantly igniting the unlit, and you're able to better control the temperatures. And really, the Minion method, or the MM, as people put on the forums, is a widely known and widely used term and method of firing up. A lot of cookers, whether it be offset people that are using charcoal baskets to get their fires going, or, you name it, any charcoal-driven source is probably lit by the Minion method 80, 90% of the time, I would say.
Okay. Now, one last question, and they are called water smokers because they have water pans.
Right.
Do you use a water pan in yours, and if so, why or why not?
I have 2. So one I use as a water pan, as it should, and then the other one I actually have filled with sand. I'm a big sand guy. There's a lot of talk about the water pan actually adding a moisture content into the cooker. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think it's a bunch of bull. Basically, what that's there for is a heat sink. It's supposed to regulate the temperature of your cooker so it doesn't go over a certain amount, or it's able to stay within barbecue temperature easier than if you didn't have it. So it's there just to basically soak up energy on the fire. The downside, I think my personal experience has shown that you're able to maintain temperatures a little easier with water. The problem is when you're doing an overnight cook, the water is going to evaporate eventually. If you don't have some type of device to let you know, or if you don't set your clock to go check it at 3 o'clock in the morning to add more water, you're going to have temperature spikes because now you're heat sink is evaporated. Your heat sink is sunk. So a lot of people have decided to find alternative ways for heat sinks, and one that is very popular is sand. You go to Home Depot and just buy a thing of playground sand, which is sanitized, and dump it 2/3 full into the water pan, cover it with foil, and stick it in there. There's argument back and forth about, well, it cooks hotter, where if you're using a water pan, it's supposed to be cooler by the water pan versus on the level above it. Well, that's supposed to be reversed when you're doing it with sand because of radiant heat. I don't necessarily find that there's that big of a difference between sand, and it's very convenient. You don't have to get up and refill it. If it gets dirty, you can throw it out, and it's cheap to replace. I'm a little lazy when it comes to cleanup like that, so all you have to do is throw the foil off the top of it, and you're done. I'm a big sand believer, and I'll continue to use it, and I know a lot of people that do.
Excellent. All right, so let's move to the second category as I've sort of outlined it here, and these would be the automatic smokers. And so the first one that we'll talk about are the electric smokers, and examples of these are the Cook Shack and the Smoke and Tex. And these ones will basically start you at about $500, and they go up from there. And they pretty much work by using an electric heating element that provides the heat, and then you throw in some wood chunks for smoke.
Well, my dad has a Cook Shack 008, and he loves it. I mean, it's it's really, what's the effort that you want to invest in it as a user, as a barbecuer? I mean, do you want something that ultimately will taste like, quality barbecue, but you don't want to put forth the work and the effort and the romance of barbecue? Then I think electric cooker is something that you would want to take a look at it, because ultimately it gives you an end product that is very good. And, I mean, they're neat. You plug it in, you add your 2 or 3 chunks of wood, and you're off and running. You get 2 or 3 cooking grates on those Cook Shacks and on those Smoke and Texas, and they make them bigger, so you can, if you want more room, you can get more room. What I think is really cool about those is they make a host of accessories. I'm a big jerky guy. I love beef jerky, or turkey jerky, or deer jerky, or whatever. And Cook Shack makes these skewers that are also the same width size as your regular cooking racks. So you get your eye of round, and you do your curing and all that good stuff, and then you just cut them up, hang your jerky pieces on these skewers, and just slide them right into the Cook Shack. And 3 hours later, you have delicious beef jerky, and to me, that sells it for me right off the bat. I mean, it couldn't be easier. And there's they have rib hooks and just a great number of cool accessories. If you're a barbecue guy, you're inherently a gadget guy, so that's right up anybody's alley. Smoke and Tex is similar. You can't use them in competitions because it's just a plug-in thing, and it has to be wood-fired or wood fuel sourced in order to be legal. Again, it's something that I would get. I've seen it work in person. They're quality units and well worth the money.
Okay. All right. Now the next one in that category is what they call the biscuit smoker, and that's a Bradley, and that uses essentially little pucks, hockey pucks of pressed wood, and it just feeds these things in. And it's similar to the pellets, but just uses really, really big pellets. So I've heard a lot of stuff not a lot of good stuff, I should say, about the Bradleys. I mean, one of the big issues is that you have to go to them to buy the biscuits. So what's your thought on how these things cook, and is this one that you would recommend? These things run about $400 to $600, so they're a little cheaper than the Cook Shacks, but not by much.
Yeah, I think you can actually, one of those bigger box stores like a Costco's or Sam's, I think, have some type of variation if it's not the Bradley itself. I don't know a lot of people that have them. I mean, typically if it's something good in the barbecue community, I mean, the subculture is so on top of things and is so quick to, run good things right up the flagpole and screen from the mountaintops how good they are. And Bradley Smoker is just not one that is really ever bannered about or, something that you just have to have. So would I recommend it? No. I mean, there's a number of other things that I know work well for the price range that's in. So, no, I wouldn't recommend it. And people just don't seem to really be hot on it.
Okay. Which brings us to the next one, which is the pellet smokers. And the big name in that one is Traeger, and that'll run you about $800 and up. And then another one is the Country Smoker, which starts around $650. What's your thoughts on these?
Traeger is a very good unit. I know a lot of teams that actually compete with these. I know a lot of guys just have them as backyard barbecue pits. They're unique in the fact that they run off, little pellets. I believe, the new catchphrase for these things is micro stick burners. They're legal in competition because ultimately it is a wood-fired source. So, it is burning wood, so technically it's legal in competition. Now, of course, you can get into semantics about is that real barbecue, or is the guy doing the stick burner, or the guy doing the Weber Smoky Mountain, or whatever. That's a whole different conversation for a different day. But ultimately, they perform well. You've kind of set the temperature that you want to keep it at, and the auger runs around and delivers, a certain amount of pellets as the temperature, goes down, and it adds these little pellets into the firebox and continues to burn. They're nice because you can kind of mix and match your flavor profiles. If you want to start with, a hickory wood and then mix in a little bit of cherry or a little bit of pecan or oak, you dump in those pellets, and the wood and the smoke is put on your meat for that flavor profile. So that's kind of unique. There probably isn't too many smokers out there that I wouldn't want one if I could get one. The only downfall to Traeger is I believe they also say that you can grill on it, but I don't know anybody that has one that says that it really gets up into anything that would be a grillable temperature, which in my eyes is something 450, 475, and then well above that into the 600-700.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, they definitely don't do that. So,
yeah.
Well, now that brings us to the Cadillac of the pellet smokers, and that's the Fast Eddie Cook Shacks, and that one's going to run you about $3,000. So you got to be ready to make a big commitment. Now, what's your thoughts on that one?
I know Eddie. We haven't met personally, but I've interviewed him a number of times on my podcast show, and I've done an interview with him on the radio show. I mean, he's very accessible and very successful. And this is his, this is his baby. He's got the 100, which a lot of people use, like yourself. It's very popular on the competition circuit. But then he's made even bigger ones to really outfit the restaurant market. Similar cooking on pellets idea. But I mean, this is it takes up this main part. The auger is a Traeger auger. I mean, this is something that they've worked out a deal with Traeger where they pay Traeger a royalty or a percentage on every unit they sell, because Eddie saw the Traeger and said, hey, this is really something that's going to be working, and he's a very big believer in pellets and wanted to use that, so they were able to strike that deal. And then, of course, Eddie got on and did his own thing with the actual cooking unit itself. What can you say about it? I mean, the IQ4 is just a ridiculous piece of engineering and machinery to keep the temperature, within, was it like 1 or 2 degrees during the cook. It is set it and forget it. It's easy. It's easy to kind of use. It is expensive, but I mean, you can't possibly deny its results. I mean, it wins a lot in competition, which is where anybody worth their salt that's making a cooker is going to want to test it anyway. And people that just have it in their backyard, and I do know a couple people, they love it. They rave about it. So, if I had $3,500 to blow, that would be the first thing that I would buy, because everybody loves it. Everybody raves about it, and I could go compete with it and win.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So, a couple of notes when I was preparing for this podcast, I did a little research on some of the various boards and asked some questions, and just a couple of things for comparison purposes. First thing is that the electric smokers, the Cook Shack, and Cook Shack also makes the Fast Eddie, the FEC 100. And the big difference that people pointed out was that with the electric smokers, you got more of a moist heat. And, in fact, one person even suggested that periodically you might want to open the door of your Cook Shack to vent some of the moisture. Because I had one person who came back and said that they just didn't get the kind of bark on the smoked foods out of their Cook Shacks that they do out of like an FEC or out of a Traeger, just because it's more of a moist, locked-in type environment. So
It's funny you mentioned that. When I was down at my parents' place seeing the Cook Shack in action for the very first time, I was sitting out on the lanai enjoying my 15th or 16th beer, and we had put in a pork butt and a brisket for the following day's events for football. And I was maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours into the cook, this thing released a steam bomb, and it scared me to death. I was running into the house thinking we were it was so unbelievable, and I think my dad said he saw it coming, but he just didn't think to say anything about it. My back was turned towards it, and this thing just releases a steam bomb. And I'm like, whoa, what is that all about? And so he kind of hit me to the fact, like you just said, it really does produce a moister cooking environment. Now, as far as, how is the bark and this and that, depending on what you're cooking, typically, a method or the most general method of anything when you're cooking briskets or pork butts. I mean, you're not really taking it right off the cooker, slamming it down on the plate and eating it. You're going to wrap it in foil and let it rest. And ultimately, your bark is going to soften up that way regardless. So, I mean, it's probably half a dozen one, six in the other as far as the bark is concerned. Ribs is a little bit different. But again, that process to cook ribs is completely different than you would if you're going to be cooking pork butts or briskets or chicken. So I wouldn't worry too much about the moist cooking environment, but watch out for the steam bombs because they happen. I've seen it firsthand.
Okay. Then the other note was on, say, for example, the Traegers and some of the other pellet grills compared to, say, the FEC, is that, as you pointed out earlier with some of the other smokers we've talked about, they do unfortunately have relatively thin walls. And so you're going to be more at the mercy of the outside temperature. And in the case of the automatic smokers, they're going to compensate for it, but they're going to burn through a lot more wood. Whereas with the FEC, I mean, I think you got like 1.5 to 2 inches of insulation all the way around the thing. And I was pointing out to Mike when we were over last weekend, we cooked a pizza, so I got the FEC up to about 425, 430 degrees, and you could touch the outside, and it was cold to the touch.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's great with all the those insulated cookers like we were talking about previously too. Is you can really run them into the 450 degree range and touch them all, and they're very cool to the touch. Fast Eddie's is the same way. The other thing that I would like to point out is in regard to the pellet cookers. Traeger doesn't have a problem, and Fast Eddie doesn't because they obviously use the same auger system. But there's a new pellet grill out there. It might have been that one you had mentioned, the Country Smoker or whatever it was called. I've heard firsthand from a very credible source that this new pellet cooker, since it is not a Traeger-driven auger, can only eat certain types of pellets. I mean, if you're going to make something like this and try and copy the best, it just seems like it's always the best is already out there, and somebody tries to make a less expensive, not well-made, and not as good engineered product, and ultimately you're going to be running into problems. I mean, if you're going to make a pellet grill, I would imagine you want to spend the research and development dollars to make sure that if you're putting in Barbecue Delight pellets or Cook Shack pellets or wherever you're getting your fuel source from, that auger is going to eat every single brand of pellet out there. And unfortunately, this doesn't seem to be happening, with the newest pellet grill on the market. So you want to be careful. You want to go with the pellet grills that are well established, and that if you can find a good deal on cooking pellets, your machine will actually eat them and it will work properly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, there's certainly something to be said for going with the established guys that have already done the years of R&D and have beaten all the bugs out of it, so to speak. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. And what I want to kind of do to wrap this up is, my take, obviously, because I've had the experience with the manuals, but not some really good manuals, obviously. I've had experience with the automatics and probably among the best of the automatics. And so my immediate thing is to go with an automatic versus a manual. But let's say for the moment, Greg, then, obviously, if you didn't want to spend $500 or $600, the Weber Smoky Mountain is clearly the best of the ones we've talked about so far.
Right.
If you did have, say, $500, $600, $700 that you were willing to spend, what would you suggest to the first-time smoker who really just wants to get something that's going to be easy to use and it's going to turn out a good product consistently?
If they're not looking to compete with it, I would say a Cook Shack is probably going to be best served because it's easy to learn, obviously. You can play around with different flavor profiles because you have access to a lot of different flavored wood chunks. And then you also have the versatility to not only cook regular barbecue, you can smoke fish, you can do colder smokes and control your temperature better with the electric units. And then you have those accessories, so you can do the jerky and you can have the rib hooks and all that other good stuff. I mean, if I have $500 or $600, that's probably where I would go. And if I didn't want to, if I wanted to be more of a live fire guy, I would definitely look at a ceramic. I would look at a Big Green Egg. I would look at a Primo or a Kamado. I'm not really familiar with the Kamados as well as the other two that I mentioned before, but again, these are units probably within that $500 to $600 entry range that you can do not only smoking or barbecue with, but you can light them up and go grilling with them too. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1.
Okay, great. Well, again, you provided a tremendous amount of insight on smokers, and want to thank you for joining us. Mike, you have any? You've been awfully quiet, so you got.
Well, I think I've got the third segment in our series already going through my head, and that's going to be all about, okay, so now I know what I'm going to buy, and then what am I going to actually go out and, take the shot and smoke, basically. So, but I think that's probably going to be a whole other show in and of itself. So.
Yeah, and we'll bring Greg back for that one if you're amenable to it, Greg.
As long as you'll have me, I will be here.
Excellent. Well, want to thank you again, Greg. And so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to give you our thoughts on our cigar and drink pairing for the evening.